Greetings, lore seekers, and welcome back to the Lore Lord. Today we're diving deep into the saga of one of the most fascinating and controversial figures in all of Warhammer 40,000, Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf of the Space Wolves chapter. This is the story of a warrior who has spent over 7 centuries defying not just the enemies of humanity, but sometimes the very Imperium he's sworn to protect. Logan Grimnar represents something unique in the 41st millennium, a space marine chapter master who has repeatedly told the Imperium's highest authorities to go to hell and somehow lived to tell about it. He's a character who embodies both the nobility and the tragic contradictions of the Space Marines, genetically engineered to be the perfect servants of the Emperor, yet possessing enough humanity and independent judgment to recognize when that service might be leading them astray. This is more than just the biography of a single warrior. This is the story of what happens when the Imperium's greatest weapons develop consciences, when superhuman soldiers remember that they were created to protect humanity, not just serve bureaucracy. Logan Grimnar's tale is one of loyalty and rebellion, of honor and pragmatism, of a wolf who refused to be domesticated, even by the gods who made him. So settle in as we explore the complete chronicle of Logan Grimnar, from his origins as a young space wolf to his current status as one of the most respected and feared chapter masters in the galaxy, a leader who has made enemies of Inquisitors and allies of common soldiers, and who has never forgotten that true loyalty sometimes requires the courage to disobey. Origins of the Great Wolf, the making of a legend. Logan Grimnar's story begins in the icebound world of Fenris, that harsh and unforgiving planet that breeds the space wolves. Like all of his battle brothers, Grimnar began life as a mortal warrior among the fierce tribes of Fenris, proving his worth in the brutal conflicts that rage across the world's frozen continents. The exact details of his early life remain shrouded in the mists of Fenrisian saga and space wolf tradition, but what we know speaks to the character that would define his later actions. Even as a young tribal warrior, Grimnar displayed the qualities that would make him legendary: fierce independence, unwavering loyalty to his people, and a willingness to challenge authority when he believed it was wrong. When the Space Wolves recruited him, they found not just another promising warrior, but someone who embodied the best aspects of Fenrisian culture: the loyalty, the courage, and critically, the deep-seated belief that a leader's first duty is to his people, not to distant authority figures who may not understand the realities on the ground. The Crucible of the Fang. Grimnar's transformation from mortal warrior to space marine was by all accounts exemplary. He survived the brutal trials that claim the lives of most aspirants, adapted to the complex implantation process that would remake his body into something superhuman, and mastered the disciplines that would make him an angel of death. But perhaps most importantly, he never lost touch with his humanity. Where some space marines become so focused on their duties as the Emperor's warriors that they forget what they're fighting for, Grimnar retained a connection to the common people of the Imperium. This would prove crucial in shaping his later decisions as a leader. His early service as a blood claw, the Space Wolves' equivalent of an assault marine, was marked by the kind of reckless courage that would become his trademark. But even then, his superiors noted something different about him. Where other young warriors fought for glory or to prove their worth, Grimnar fought with a deeper understanding of what was at stake. Rise through the ranks. Grimnar's promotion through the ranks of the Space Wolves came not just through martial prowess, though his skills in combat were legendary, but through his ability to inspire loyalty and make difficult decisions under pressure. He proved himself capable of the kind of independent judgment that the Space Wolves value above blind obedience. As he advanced from Bloodclaw to Grey Hunter to Wolfguard, Grimnar demonstrated time and again that he understood the difference between following orders and serving the Emperor's true will. This distinction would become the defining characteristic of his leadership philosophy and would eventually put him on a collision course with Imperial authority. By the time he was chosen to lead his own great company, Grimnar had already established himself as someone who could be trusted to make the right decision, even when it contradicted official policy. His fellow Space Wolves respected him not just for his combat skills, but for his judgment, his integrity, and his unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. The Armageddon Wars, forging a legend, the first war for Armageddon. It was during the first war for Armageddon that Logan Grimnar first came to prominence beyond the Space Wolves chapter. The invasion of the industrial world by the daemon Primarch Angron and his World Eaters was one of the most serious demonic incursions in Imperial history, requiring the combined efforts of multiple Space Marine chapters, Titan legions, and millions of Imperial Guard troops. Grimnar, then leading one of the Space Wolves' great companies, distinguished himself in the brutal urban warfare that characterized the conflict. His company was instrumental in several key victories, including the defense of Hive Infernus and the assault on Demon's Gate. But it was his leadership during the final battles against Angron himself that truly established his reputation. When the demon Primarch manifested in the ruins of Hive Tartarus, it was Grimnar's company that held the line while the Grey Knights prepared their banishment ritual. The Space Wolves paid a terrible price. Nearly 2/3 of Grimnar's warriors fell in that final battle, but their sacrifice bought the time necessary to send Angron back to the warp. The betrayal revealed. What happened after the victory would shape Grimnar's worldview forever. In the aftermath of the successful defense of Armageddon, the Inquisition made a decision that would haunt the Imperium for centuries. They ordered the sterilization of the entire population of Armageddon, billions of innocent Imperial citizens who had fought heroically to defend their world. The justification was that these civilians had been tainted by exposure to demonic forces and could not be allowed to spread chaos corruption throughout the Imperium. The reality was that this was a massive overreaction by paranoid Inquisitors who valued ideological purity over human life. Grimnar and his Space Wolves were ordered to participate in this genocide. For the first time in his career, Logan Grimnar was faced with a direct order from Imperial authority that he found morally reprehensible. The people of Armageddon had proven their loyalty through blood and sacrifice. They deserved protection, not extermination. The Great Wolf's choice. What Logan Grimnar did next would define him for the rest of his long life. He refused. Not only did he refuse to participate in the massacre of innocents, but he actively opposed it, using his Space Wolves to protect Armageddon civilians from other Imperial forces. This decision was unprecedented. Space Marines are genetically conditioned to obey, trained from birth to follow orders without question. For a chapter master to directly defy the Inquisition was virtually unthinkable. But Grimnar had identified a principle higher than obedience. The Emperor's true will was to protect humanity, not slaughter it in the name of ideological purity. The conflict that followed was brutal and tragic. Space Wolves found themselves fighting against other Imperial forces, brother against brother, in a war that served only chaos. In the end, a compromise was reached. Some of the Armageddon population would be allowed to live, relocated to other worlds where they could start new lives. But the damage was done. Grimnar had made powerful enemies within the Inquisition, and the Space Wolves had established themselves as a chapter that would not blindly follow orders when those orders contradicted their deeper mission. The months of shame, testing the Wolf's resolve, the Inquisition's revenge, the aftermath of the First War for Armageddon led directly to one of the most shameful episodes in Imperial history, the period known as the Months of Shame. The Inquisition, furious at Grimnar's defiance and determined to assert their authority over the Space Marines, launched a campaign of harassment and persecution against the Space Wolves. Led by Inquisitor Lord Joros and supported by elements of the Grey Knights chapter, the Inquisition began a systematic campaign to undermine Space Wolf operations throughout their territory. Supply convoys were intercepted, recruitment from Fenris was restricted, and Space Wolf vessels were detained and searched without cause. The harassment escalated when the Inquisition demanded that the Space Wolves submit to purity testing and surrender members of their chapter for interrogation. Grimnar's response was characteristically direct. Any Inquisition vessel that entered Fenrisian space without permission would be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. The war between brothers. What followed was a low-intensity conflict that pitted Space Marines against Space Marines, Inquisitors against chapter masters, and ultimately tested the very foundations of Imperial unity. The Grey Knights, caught between their loyalty to the Inquisition and their respect for fellow Space Marines, found themselves reluctantly participating in actions that many of them privately questioned. The conflict reached its climax when Inquisitor Lord Joros, supported by a force of Grey Knights, attempted to land on Fenris itself to arrest Logan Grimnar for heretical defiance of Imperial authority. The Great Wolf's response was swift and decisive. The Inquisition force was intercepted by Space Wolf vessels and turned back with significant casualties. For a brief, terrifying moment, it seemed as though the Imperium might tear itself apart in civil war. Space Marine chapters were choosing sides, with some supporting the Inquisition's authority and others backing the Space Wolves' right to independent judgment. Resolution and consequences. The conflict was finally resolved through the intervention of other chapter masters and high-ranking Imperial officials who recognized that a full-scale civil war would serve only the enemies of humanity. A face-saving compromise was arranged that allowed both sides to claim partial victory while stepping back from the brink of disaster. The Inquisition was forced to acknowledge that Space Marine chapters retained significant autonomy in their operations, while the Space Wolves agreed to certain symbolic concessions that preserved inquisitorial dignity. More importantly, the crisis established precedents that would govern relations between Space Marines and the Inquisition for centuries to come. But the real victory belonged to Logan Grimnar. He had faced down the most powerful political force in the Imperium and emerged with his principles intact. The Space Wolves remained independent, and the precedent was established that blind obedience was not always the highest virtue in Imperial service. The Second and Third Wars for Armageddon. Return to the Crucible. When Gazgakul Mag Uruk Thraka launched his second invasion of Armageddon, Logan Grimnar was among the first to respond. The irony was not lost on him. He was returning to defend a world that had become the symbol of his defiance of Imperial authority, fighting alongside many of the same forces that had once opposed him. The Second War for Armageddon was primarily an orc conflict, lacking the demonic elements that had complicated the First War. This allowed Grimnar to focus on what he did best, leading warriors in battle against a clear and straightforward enemy. His tactical genius was instrumental in several key victories, including the defense of Hive Hades and the breakthrough at Skull Pass. But even in conventional warfare, Grimnar's independent streak manifested itself. He frequently ignored operational orders when he believed his local knowledge and judgment provided better alternatives. Other Imperial commanders learned to work with the Great Wolf rather than around him, recognizing that his unconventional approaches often achieved better results than rigid adherence to doctrine. The hunt for Ghazghkull. The personal rivalry that developed between Logan Grimnar and Ghazghkull Thraka became one of the defining relationships of the 41st millennium. The Orc war boss represented everything that Grimnar opposed: mindless violence, the subjugation of the innocent, and the corruption of everything civilized and decent. But Ghazghkull also represented a worthy adversary, a foe whose cunning and strength demanded the best efforts of the Great Wolf. Their battles became legendary, with each encounter raising the stakes and deepening their mutual respect as enemies. When Ghazghkull escaped at the end of the Second War for Armageddon, Grimnar made a personal vow to hunt down the beast and end his threat permanently. This quest would take him across the galaxy, bringing him into conflict with not just orcs, but with Imperial authorities, who felt he was neglecting his duties to pursue a personal vendetta. The Third War. Vindication and tragedy. The Third War for Armageddon saw Grimnar return once again to the world that had shaped his destiny. By this time, he was recognized as one of the foremost experts on orc warfare in the Imperium, and his tactical advice was sought by commanders throughout the Imperial forces. The war's climax came when Grimnar finally cornered Ghazghkull in personal combat. The battle between the Great Wolf and the Beast was everything their previous encounters had promised, a titanic clash between two legendary warriors at the peak of their powers. In the end, it was Grimnar who stood victorious, but the victory came at a terrible cost. The Great Wolf was mortally wounded in the battle, his body broken by Ghazghkull's power claw. For a moment, it seemed as though the Imperium had lost one of its greatest champions. Death and resurrection, the dreadnought years, the ultimate sacrifice. Logan Grimnar's apparent death in combat against Ghazghkull represented the end of an era. Here was a warrior who had defied Inquisitors, challenged Imperial doctrine, and spent centuries proving that loyalty to the Emperor's true will sometimes required disobedience to the Emperor's servants. His funeral on Fenris was attended by representatives from across the Imperium, not just Space Marines, but Imperial Guard officers, planetary governors, and even some Inquisitors who had come to respect his judgment, even when they disagreed with his methods. But death would not be the end of Logan Grimnar's story. The Space Wolves' Iron Priests, recognizing that the Great Wolf's wisdom and experience were too valuable to lose, made the decision to entomb him in a dreadnought sarcophagus. Even in death, Grimnar would continue to serve his people. The Ancients' Wisdom. Grimnar's time as a dreadnought marked a new phase in his legend. Freed from the physical limitations of even a Space Marine's enhanced body, he could focus entirely on strategy and leadership. His counsel became even more valuable as he combined centuries of experience with the enhanced analytical capabilities of the dreadnought's machine spirit. During this period, Grimnar became something of an elder statesman among the Space Marines. Young chapter masters would seek his advice, Imperial Guard commanders would request his strategic input, and even some Inquisitors learned to value his judgment over their own prejudices. The dreadnought years also allowed Grimnar to take a longer view of Imperial politics. He could see patterns and connections that escaped those caught up in the immediate pressures of command. His warnings about the growing chaos threat, the dangers of inquisitorial overreach, and the need for greater cooperation between Imperial forces proved remarkably prescient. The voice of experience. One of the most significant aspects of Grimnar's dreadnought years was his role as a mentor to the next generation of Space Wolf leaders. He helped train the warriors who would eventually take his place, passing on not just tactical knowledge, but the philosophical principles that had guided his own career. His teachings emphasized the importance of independent judgment, the need to remember the human cost of military decisions, and the understanding that true loyalty sometimes required the courage to disobey. These lessons would prove crucial as the Imperium faced new challenges that required flexible thinking rather than rigid doctrine. Grimnar also used his status as a revered ancient to bridge the gap between the Space Wolves and other imperial institutions. His reputation for integrity and his obvious dedication to the Emperor's true will gave him credibility with officials who might otherwise be suspicious of Space Wolf independence. The Great Wolf Reborn, the return to life. In one of the most dramatic developments in recent Imperial history, Logan Grimnar was restored to life through circumstances that remain classified at the highest levels of the Space Wolves chapter. What we know is that the combination of advanced medical technology, Space Wolf ingenuity, and what some whisper was divine intervention, succeeded in transferring Grimnar's consciousness back to a living body. The restored Logan Grimnar was not quite the same warrior who had fallen in battle against Gazgkul. His new body, while retaining his genetic template, had been enhanced beyond even normal Space Marine capabilities. He was stronger, faster, and more durable than before, but more importantly, he retained all of his memories, experience, and hard-won wisdom. His resurrection sent shockwaves throughout the Imperium. Here was proof that death itself was not necessarily permanent, that the most valuable servants of the Emperor might find ways to transcend even the ultimate limitation. For his enemies, it was a terrifying development. Logan Grimnar had returned from the dead with all of his defiance intact. The modern Great Wolf, the restored Logan Grimnar, faced a galaxy that had changed significantly during his time as a dreadnought. The 13th Black Crusade had torn the galaxy in half with the Great Rift, new Xenos threats had emerged, and the Imperium itself was undergoing dramatic changes with the return of Primarch Robotu Guilliman. Grimnar's response to these developments has been characteristically independent. While he has cooperated with Guilliman's reforms where they make sense, he has also continued to chart his own course when he believes the Space Wolves' unique perspective is needed. His relationship with the returned Primarch is complex and fascinating. Guilliman represents the kind of central authority that Grimnar has spent centuries learning to navigate around, but the Lord of Ultramar has also proven willing to listen to different viewpoints and adapt his strategies based on local conditions. The veteran's perspective. Perhaps the most valuable thing that the modern Logan Grimnar brings to Imperial leadership is his unique perspective on the long arc of Imperial history. He has seen the consequences of both blind obedience and reckless rebellion. He understands the delicate balance between loyalty and independence that defines effective Space Marine leadership. His advice to younger chapter masters has become legendary. Serve the Emperor's will, not his servant's pride. Protect humanity, not human institutions, and remember that sometimes the greatest loyalty requires the courage to say no. The philosophy of the Great Wolf: honor before obedience. Logan Grimnar's worldview can be summarized in a simple principle: honor comes before obedience. This doesn't mean he advocates rebellion for its own sake, but rather that he believes Space Marines must be guided by their understanding of right and wrong, rather than blind adherence to orders. This philosophy stems from his understanding of what the Space Marines were created to be. The Emperor didn't make demigods just to have powerful servants. He created them to be guardians of humanity, protectors who would have the strength and wisdom to make difficult decisions in impossible circumstances. When orders from higher authority conflict with this primary mission, Grimnar believes that Space Marines must choose the higher loyalty. This has put him in conflict with Imperial bureaucracy repeatedly, but it has also made him one of the most trusted and effective military leaders in the galaxy. The human connection. Unlike many Space Marines who become disconnected from normal humanity over the centuries, Grimnar has maintained his connection to the people he's sworn to protect. He remembers what it's like to be mortal, vulnerable, and dependent on others for protection. This connection manifests itself in his tactical decisions, his treatment of Imperial Guard units under his command, and his willingness to risk his own forces to protect civilian populations. Where other commanders might write off civilian casualties as acceptable losses, Grimnar treats each death as a personal failure. His ability to inspire loyalty among normal humans is legendary. Imperial Guard troops who have served alongside the Space Wolves speak of Grimnar with a reverence usually reserved for saints. They know that he sees them as more than just expendable resources. The long view. Grimnar's centuries of experience have given him a perspective that few other Imperial leaders possess. He has seen the long-term consequences of short-sighted decisions, witnessed the rise and fall of entire crusades, and learned to recognize the patterns that repeat throughout Imperial history. This perspective makes him skeptical of grand strategies that ignore practical realities, and suspicious of leaders who promise easy solutions to complex problems. He has learned that sustainable victories require patience, careful planning, and the willingness to accept partial success rather than demanding perfect outcomes. His strategic advice often emphasizes the importance of building coalitions, maintaining supply lines, and preparing for the unexpected. These may seem like basic military principles, but Grimnar has seen too many campaigns fail because their leaders ignored these fundamentals in pursuit of glorious objectives. Relationships and rivalries. The Inquisition. Eternal tension. Grimnar's relationship with the Inquisition remains complex and often antagonistic. While he has earned the respect of some Inquisitors who appreciate his effectiveness and integrity, others still view him as a dangerous precedent, a Space Marine who places his own judgment above Imperial authority. This tension is exacerbated by the fact that Grimnar has been proven right more often than wrong in his conflicts with the Inquisition. His protection of the Armageddon survivors, his warnings about inquisitorial overreach, and his advocacy for more flexible approaches to Xenos threats have all been vindicated by subsequent events. The relationship is further complicated by mutual dependence. The Inquisition needs effective military leaders like Grimnar to carry out their missions, while Grimnar recognizes that for all their flaws, the Inquisition is a necessary evil. Inquisitors serve a necessary function in protecting the Imperium from internal threats. Fellow Chapter Masters. Respect and influence. Among other Space Marine, Chapter Masters, Logan Grimnar holds a unique position. He is simultaneously an inspiration and a cautionary tale, a leader who has achieved legendary status through his willingness to defy authority, but who has also paid significant costs for his independence. Many younger Chapter Masters seek his counsel, particularly when facing difficult decisions that pit their duties against their conscience. Grimnar's example has given them permission to think for themselves while still maintaining their loyalty to the Emperor's true will. His influence on Space Marine culture extends beyond formal advice-giving. The precedents he has set, the idea that Space Marines can and should question orders that conflict with their primary mission, have slowly permeated throughout the Adeptus Astartes. The common soldiers, a people's champion. Perhaps Grimnar's most important relationships are with the common soldiers of the Imperial Guard and the civilian populations he has protected. These are the people who have the most to gain from his philosophy of putting human welfare before institutional authority. Stories of Grimnar's protection of civilians, his willingness to risk Space Marine lives to save Imperial Guard units, and his genuine concern for the people of the Imperium have spread throughout the galaxy. He has become a folk hero among common soldiers, proof that not all of the Emperor's angels of death have forgotten their humanity. This popular support has given Grimnar a kind of political protection that formal authority cannot provide. It's much harder for his enemies to move against him when he's seen as a champion of the common people rather than just another rebellious space marine. Legacy and impact. Changing the nature of loyalty. Logan Grimnar's greatest contribution to the Imperium may be his redefinition of what loyalty means for Space Marines. Before his example, loyalty was generally understood as obedience, following orders regardless of personal opinion or moral qualms. Grimnar has demonstrated that true loyalty requires moral courage, the willingness to disobey orders that conflict with the Emperor's true will, even when that disobedience comes at great personal cost. This concept has slowly spread throughout the Space Marine chapters, creating a more thoughtful and morally engaged warrior culture. The impact of this change cannot be overstated. Space Marines who see themselves as moral agents, rather than just weapons, are more effective at protecting humanity and more resistant to the various corruptions that threaten Imperial forces. A model for leadership. Grimnar's leadership style has influenced a generation of Imperial commanders. His combination of tactical brilliance, moral integrity, and willingness to accept responsibility for difficult decisions has set a standard that other leaders strive to emulate. His approach to coalition building, his emphasis on protecting subordinates, and his ability to maintain morale in desperate circumstances have all become subjects of study in Imperial military academies. Even officers who disagree with his politics respect his effectiveness as a combat leader. Perhaps most importantly, Grimnar has shown that effective leadership requires the courage to make unpopular decisions when they serve the greater good. His willingness to accept personal consequences for his choices has inspired others to take similar stands when faced with moral crises. The living example. At over 700 years old, Logan Grimnar represents something unique in the Imperium, a leader who has maintained his principles while adapting to changing circumstances. He has shown that it's possible to be both loyal and independent, both obedient and morally autonomous. His example has given hope to Imperial citizens who might otherwise despair at the bureaucratic indifference and institutional corruption that plague their civilization. Here is proof that some of the Emperor's servants remember their true purpose and are willing to fight for it. For younger Space Marines, Grimnar represents the possibility of a meaningful career that serves both the Emperor and their own conscience. They don't have to choose between effectiveness and integrity. They can have both if they're willing to pay the price. The current era. An elder statesman. The Indomitus Crusade and beyond. In the current era of the 41st millennium, Logan Grimnar finds himself in the unusual position of being an elder statesman in an Imperium that has traditionally valued youth and aggression over wisdom and experience. The return of Robot Guilliman and the launch of the Indomitus Crusade have created opportunities for leaders like Grimnar to contribute their hard-won knowledge to the Imperium's strategic planning. Grimnar's role in the current era is complex and multifaceted. He remains the chapter master of the Space Wolves, responsible for their ongoing operations and the defense of Fenrisian space. But he also serves as an informal advisor to other Imperial leaders, a role that his centuries of experience and his reputation for integrity have uniquely qualified him to fill. His relationship with Guilliman has been particularly interesting to observe. The returned Primarch represents the kind of central authority that Grimnar has spent his career learning to work around. But Guilliman has also shown a pragmatic willingness to incorporate different perspectives and adapt his strategies based on local conditions. The mentor and the student. One of the most significant aspects of Grimnar's current role is his function as a mentor to younger Space Marine leaders. The lessons he has learned through centuries of conflict, both military and political, are invaluable for chapter masters who are facing similar challenges in their own careers. His advice typically emphasizes the importance of maintaining perspective, understanding the human cost of military decisions, and remembering that Space Marines serve humanity rather than human institutions. These may seem like simple concepts, but in the pressure of command, they can be easily forgotten. Grimnar's mentoring extends beyond formal advice-giving to include practical demonstrations of leadership principles. Young commanders who serve alongside him learn by example how to balance competing loyalties, how to make difficult decisions under pressure, and how to maintain the respect of both superiors and subordinates. The continuing mission. Despite his age and the many battles he has fought, Logan Grimnar shows no signs of slowing down. If anything, his resurrection and restoration seem to have renewed his sense of purpose and commitment to the defense of humanity. His current operations continue to reflect his core principles, protecting the innocent, fighting effectively against the enemies of humanity, and maintaining the independence necessary for effective decision-making. Whether facing new Xenos threats, combating chaos incursions, or navigating Imperial politics, Grimnar continues to demonstrate the same combination of tactical brilliance and moral courage that has defined his career. The Great Wolf remains one of the most respected and feared military leaders in the Imperium, a warrior whose reputation opens doors and whose opposition carries real consequences. His word carries weight in Imperial councils, and his support can legitimize controversial decisions or strategies. Conclusion: the Wolf's enduring howl, a legacy of principled defiance. Fellow lore-seekers, as we conclude this comprehensive examination of Logan Grimnar's extraordinary career, we're left with a character who embodies both the highest ideals and the fundamental contradictions of the Imperium of man. Here is a warrior, created to serve without question, who has made questioning his greatest service. A leader who has achieved legendary status by refusing to accept that legendary status exempts him from moral responsibility. Grimnar's story is ultimately about the tension between loyalty and conscience, between obedience and integrity, between serving the Emperor and serving the Emperor's true will. His resolution of these tensions, through principled defiance when necessary and loyal service when possible, has created a model of leadership that continues to influence the Imperium centuries after his first act of rebellion, the price of integrity. Perhaps the most important lesson we can draw from Logan Grimnar's story is that integrity comes with a cost. His willingness to stand up for his principles has earned him enemies, complicated his relationships with Imperial authority, and sometimes put his own chapter at risk. But it has also earned him something more valuable: the respect and loyalty of those who serve under him, the gratitude of those he has protected, and the knowledge that his actions have served the Emperor's true purpose rather than just the convenience of Imperial bureaucracy. Grimnar has shown that Space Marines can be more than just weapons. They can be moral agents who use their power in service of justice rather than just orders. This transformation of the Space Marine role from mindless obedience to thoughtful service represents one of the most significant developments in Imperial culture: the Eternal Howl. Logan Grimnar's greatest contribution to the Imperium may be his demonstration that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless. His protection of innocence, his defiance of corrupt authority, and his unwavering commitment to the true spirit of the Emperor's vision have all required him to take stands that seemed certain to end in failure. Yet by taking these stands, by howling his defiance into the darkness of the 41st millennium, Grimnar has kept alive ideals that might otherwise have been forgotten. He has reminded the Imperium that its purpose is not just survival, but the protection of something worth surviving for. In a universe where hope is often the first casualty of pragmatism, Logan Grimnar represents the stubborn refusal to accept that things must always be as they are. His career stands as proof that individual courage and moral clarity can make a difference even in the vast, grinding machinery of Imperial civilization. The great wolf's howl echoes across the centuries, a call to remember what the Imperium was supposed to be and what it could still become if enough of its servants had the courage to serve humanity rather than just human institutions. The living legend. As Logan Grimnar continues his service in the current era, he represents something unique in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, a character who has grown and evolved while maintaining his core principles. He is simultaneously ancient and vital, traditional and revolutionary, loyal and rebellious. His story reminds us that even in the grim darkness of the far future, individual choice and moral courage matter. That loyalty to higher principles sometimes requires disloyalty to lower authorities, and that sometimes the greatest service we can render is to refuse to serve blindly. Logan Grimnar, the great wolf of Fenris, stands as one of the most compelling characters in all of Warhammer 40,000, a hero who has earned his legend not through unthinking obedience, but through the much harder path of thoughtful defiance. In a universe that often seems to reward only strength and cunning, he has shown that honor, integrity, and genuine care for others can be the greatest strengths of all. Thank you for joining the Lore Lord for this deep dive into the legend of Logan Grimnar, one of Warhammer 40,000's most complex and fascinating characters. His story of principled defiance and loyal service offers lessons that extend far beyond the confines of the 41st millennium. What aspects of Grimnar's character resonate most with you? Do you think his defiance of Imperial authority was justified, or did he cross lines that should not be crossed? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The debate over Grimnar's legacy is one of the most interesting discussions in 40,000 lore. If you enjoyed this comprehensive analysis, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the characters and conflicts that define our favorite universes. Hit that notification bell to stay updated on all the latest lore explorations. And remember, sometimes the greatest loyalty requires the courage to howl your defiance into the darkness. This is the Lore Lord, signing off from the frozen wastes of Fenris. Keep seeking the lore. Keep questioning authority when conscience demands it. And remember, the wolf that will not heal often sees dangers that the pack dog misses.